Settle down, make yourself comfy, and just listen as myself and Baz tell you about one of the most romantic fairy tale stories in all of football history. And it all starts with once upon a time there was a little Argentinian goat. And if you'd have been listening a few weeks ago, you'd have heard all about this before it happened. This is Talk of the Trinity.
Hello and welcome back to Talk of the Trinity podcast. It has been a long time since we've last been with you. We've missed you. You've missed us a little bit, come on. You got to admit it, in terms of we've had a whole tournament's worth of action that has taken place since we were last here. I think it's been a while, but I am still Baz Barrett. With me is Father Christmas. Nope, I mean Mr. Trinity himself, Will Forrest. And we've got to address some big issues, some big rumours before we get stuck in, because you will have listened to our World Cup preview, which released on the eve of the World Cup. And we did tease some potential episodes during the World Cup, which did not happen. And there are rumours that the reason that did not happen is because I went on strike. Because, well, everybody else is, aren't they, at the moment in the UK? And some rumours were going out in terms of Mr. Trinity running some unscrupulous working practices here at Talk of the Trinity Towers. But I just want to assure all the listeners that pay terms have been agreed and a 100% pay rise has been negotiated for both of us in terms of bringing this. So we are getting a big round figure for presenting this. And it starts with a 0 and it ends with a 0. But we're not on strike. Things happened. We're now back. But we have been keeping you, as I'm sure you're aware, up to date with what's been going on in the Villa world on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity. You've probably, if you've been missing us, you've been checking us out on our YouTube channel, Talk of the Trinity, looking back at past videos. Probably, if you are watching the YouTube video now, thinking you've aged a lot in the last month. We have, it's winter, the depths of winter. It does things to a person. Or you've just been keeping yourself up to date audio style with our audio podcasts, listening to the World Cup preview, ticking off the great predictions that we made. We'll be coming on to those during the course of this episode, don't worry. But we are on Amazon, Apple, Spotify, Google, FanHub, some other places, potentially. Some we probably haven't been paying the dues over the last month, so we might have been struck off. But you will be able to find us, whether you want to listen, watch, or do all. I mean, personally, I like to have a listen when I'm in the kitchen preparing some food. Those dulcet tones. Maybe it's because holding a knife. That kind of. That's the atmosphere that I like a bit of Talk of the Trinity. But talking about sharp, cutting edge analysis. What a link. That brings us to our World Cup review episode. You probably noticed there was a World Cup on. It happened. There were events off the field that occurred. Events on the field eventually took the majority of people's attention. But from a Villa perspective in the tournament, with one notable award-winning exception, which we will talk about later on. 3 other Villa players in the tournament. Not really too much home to write about, really, which is convenient for us because 2 of them play for the same team, so we can get this out of the way. Matty Cash, I think in terms of his shirt collection, was probably the real winner in terms of his World Cup experience, and Jan Bednarek. Poland, second round exit to France. What did you think of their contribution in the World Cup?
I think Poland did everything that we expected them to do, didn't they? Really, they've got a strong enough team that you'd think that they'd get into the round of 16, and they lost to a team who are much better than them that nobody expected them to beat. I think the one thing about Poland is that everybody just links them to Robert Lewandowski, and rightly so. Robert Lewandowski, one of the most informed strikers that there are in world football for the last however many years. Even before his time at Barca and Bayern, he was banging them in for Dortmund. I remember him ripping Real Madrid apart. But he's never done it on the World Cup stage for Poland before. Finally scored for them, which was nice. It was one of the memories that were created in this World Cup, and there were a lot of memorable historic moments, of course. Though it nearly went all wrong for him with that penalty against Mexico. But they did what we expected. Bednarek didn't really get too much football, did he? Matty Cash did well. As you say, his shirt collection is phenomenal. And the fact that Ronaldinho apparently wanted a picture with him on the beach, though, I imagine there's a bit of tongue-in-cheek there. But no, fair play to the young bloke. He'll be at the Euros next time. I'm sure he'll be at the next World Cup after that if Poland qualify. I mean, everybody's got a chance, haven't they, of qualifying? The old dog and duck pub down the road has, with the amount of teams that are going to be in it. But I think Poland did what we expected. They're never going to be a team that you think are going to win the competition, but you'd expect them to get to the knockout stages and potentially get to a quarterfinal at best.
Yeah, I think in terms of how I'd sum up Cash's tournament, which is probably good news for Villa fans, is he did well enough for us to go, we told you he was good, but not well enough for any of the big clubs to come in with big money in January or in the summer, or, kind of some players have like a breakout tournament at a World Cup whereby the name on everybody's lips, and people who dip in and out of football every 4 years are like, oh man, this guy, what an amazing player. That won't be Cash. So I think we got the best of both worlds. So we don't have to console him, kind of after a terrible World Cup. But, I think in terms of, we won't have to worry looking for a first choice right back in January, which is good because we've only got one right back. So it's good news that we have Cash sticking around for a little while longer. I think it's in terms of Lewandowski, is particularly in the Argentina game, final group game of the Group C, I think they're in. But
yep.
It was in terms of, there's a great player, Lewandowski. There's only so much you can do as a striker when your team can't even get the ball like outside their own penalty area. And I think in terms of that is in the games against the bigger teams, if your defensive tactic of the other 10 players is just to keep everyone behind the ball and hope that the opposition don't score, then there's only so much a player like Lewandowski is going to be able to do, because he's not he hasn't got the pace kind of to go running past about 5 players. But yeah, that second round draw confirmed against Poland, Poland confirmed against France. Yeah, I think we expected France to win, and they did quite comfortably, really, from recollection. But yeah, as you said, good experience for Cash. You expect them to qualify for the Euros as well, so that's only good news for kind of Villa in the medium term if we can keep hold of him when he's been competing against those great players. Although he might need to build a new kind of sunroom in his house to put those shirts in if Poland keep qualifying for tournaments. So the final Villa player who we're going to talk about at this stage, Dendoncker of Belgium. We're going to talk more about Belgium a bit later because somebody didn't think they were going to be any good, whereas somebody thought they were going to get to the final. But in terms of Dendoncker, his performances for Belgium, it strikes me a bit of a case of when you see kind of the bin on fire at the front of the room, you just kind of tiptoe your way backwards out the door and then do a runner. I don't really have much to say about Dendoncker, to be honest. I mean, in terms of there's other players, well, and the manager ultimately, Martinez, left the team immediately after Belgium's participation in the tournament drew to an end. Dendoncker does what Dendoncker does, really, in terms of, but it doesn't have Dougie Luiz in front of him when he's playing for Belgium. Any thoughts on Dendoncker in a Belgium shirt? Do you think he's going to have any long-term kind of potential negative impacts when he comes back to Villa, or was it just such a massive slap in the face that you just kind of like a cold ice bucket challenge, just shake it off and get back on with it?
I think that he'll be pretty glad to be back around the youngsters after being with his old Belgian relatives. They, I know we'll come on to them in a bit, but they really capitulated. Dendoncker, though, starts the first game, doesn't start in his usual centre midfield role. If I remember rightly, they either played a back three and he started within that, or he started at right back of a back four. I can't really remember. It's been that long ago, and this cold cough flu thing's been going around as well. But they win that one. Then Donker plays. He doesn't play in the next game. They lose. They lose their third game. Leander Dendoncker must have realised afterwards, along with all the other Belgian players, that the phrase "golden generation" is never a good thing when it comes to major tournaments. You remember the England golden generation, pile of rubbish, and now this Belgian one. Well, they've got a lot of work to do. Dendoncker, it's a shame. At least he got a win at the tournament. Come back to the Villa. I'm sure Unai will be playing quite a bit, and we'll shoot up the league.
Yeah, and you mentioned in terms of playing in a slightly different position for Belgium in that game he started. That versatility is going to be useful for Villa in terms of, well, we'll see what January brings in terms of transfers, and no doubt we will be having a Villa transfer window special in or near the new year. But if you're in that situation where it can be a bit tricky to bring players in January, and if we do need to utilise the squad that we do have, then has demonstrated he can, switch positions, at the highest level you can at the World Cup. So we'll take the positives from that, because there were very few for Belgium, kind of as a whole during the tournament. So one player who did play, we're not talking about because that's coming at the end, but the players who didn't play, the players who didn't get on their respective national planes to get themselves over to Qatar, are there any that you can think of looking back now where their national managers or ex-national managers will be there thinking, should have put them on my 26? I wish, I hadn't lost my phone the week before and had to delete all my numbers and reconstitute my contacts list. Or was it pretty much this was what it was going to be from a Villa perspective?
I think you could potentially argue the case for two players to have enhanced the squad a little bit more, or to have given a bit more depth to certain positions in their squads. And when you look at our starting lineup, really, or our players that could have been picked, there aren't too many. I mean, Ollie Watkins isn't going to get picked to play for England. Danny Ings hit form at the wrong time, obviously. Sweden weren't there, otherwise Robin would have been there, of course, guarding their net. For me, there's three players, aren't there, really? There's Boubacar Kamara, though I don't think he'd have got into the squad anyway. When you've got Tchouameni, Rabiot as well, and Camavinga, who were all playing for elite teams, Boubacar Kamara's not going to get in. He's not going to get in ahead of them. Not yet, anyway. However, I do feel that if Dougie Luiz had been taken for Brazil, he'd have been another option as opposed to Casemiro. Casemiro, very good player, but he's getting on a little bit nowadays, really.
Yeah, they're two different types of players. Maybe for maybe an option for Brazil off the bench in terms of for Luiz when the first wave didn't work. I mean, in terms of we talked about Brazil, touched upon Brazil briefly here because we will talk about them later on. You've got their knockout games were the two sides of Brazil in terms of absolutely dismantled their second round opponents and then couldn't break through in terms of the quarterfinal. Maybe Luiz could have offered a little difference in terms of creativity in that quarterfinal game.
Yeah, he's the perfect defensive player for Brazil, isn't he? Because he's quite attacking. And those are the best Brazilian defenders. I was chatting to Jake earlier about Brazil, and he went, "Who are their defenders?" I was like, "Who are their best defenders?" It's like Roberto Carlos and Cafu, and they were known for bombing forward, as was Carlos Alberto. All of those ones. It would be unfair not to mention Thiago Silva, but by the by. The other player who, when you think about it now, especially as his team only took 25 players and they had that early injury in their first match, Luca Din, he's got an abundance of caps already for France. If he'd have gone, would he have got in ahead of Theo Hernandez? No. Was Theo Hernandez one of the best left backs in the World Cup? Yeah, overall he was. But they could have played Lucas Hernandez at centre back then, which is where he tends to play for Bayern Munich. So maybe if they had have taken him as well, they'd have had a little bit of another option, a dead ball specialist. So he could have helped out there, and it may have changed the course of history. All in all, if Lucas hadn't started at left back, but we'll never know. And Luca Din has now been kept fresh for our home game against Liverpool on Boxing Day.
Yep, and in terms of our Villa Liverpool preview, keep your ears open or your eyes open, or keep them all open for that, because that will be coming later on in the week, nearer to match day. I don't know if you want to. Well, very briefly, we can talk about this now because I know we're going to be talking about England in more depth later on. Tyrone Mings. Take him, make a difference.
For the fact, well, he wouldn't have got into the team, and he wouldn't have really got onto the pitch unless it had been the last few minutes against Wales or Senegal. But I think he'd have had a much better attitude than the alleged attitude of Ben White. So, and he's a left-sided centre back. I mean, would he have stopped Giroud from scoring? Yeah, too right, he would have. But these things happen, and Gareth Southgate, you have to, he's fallen onto his own sword there, hasn't he? He's died on his hill. There we are. He's just jealous that there's actually a good Villa defender in the England squad, or was, but there we go.
We will continue to remind Tyrone Mings of his greatness.
Yes, well done, Tyrone.
When he's next back at Villa Park. But speaking of greatness, those players, they can dream that they would have made a difference for their team. They would have overachieved. We did have a go in our preview episode of trying to pick an overachiever in terms of a team, how far they would go. We both picked the same team. We both picked the Netherlands. We both said we could see a scenario in which they could get themselves past the quarterfinals, where we both had them playing Argentina. We both predicted them to lose to Argentina. That did happen in terms of that was the quarterfinal, Holland-Argentina. Argentina won on penalties. But there were glimpses in that game of a system for the Dutch to be able to potentially go further in the tournament. But even though the prediction ended up being exactly bang on, watching Holland at the World Cup, Did they play in the way that you thought they were going to play? Did it end up being exactly as predicted, or was there a bit of different feelings, mixed feelings watching that Dutch team?
I mean, it wasn't total football, was it? From the Rijkaard, Hully, Van Basten, Cruyff era of Dutch football. And it's quite funny to remember that Cruyff only played at one World Cup, which I found out from Match of the Day Top 10, you know.
Yep.
But I think that they showed that they've got a variety to their play, or they did have. Van Gaal isn't the manager anymore, is he? Didn't he? Did he step down, or am I making that up?
Well, the amount of times he's managed clubs before and come back, or then Dutch team before and come back, he might have quit and then already come back by the time we're recording this.
I mean, I think they showed that they had a versatility. We expected them to play with the wing backs, especially with the likes of Denzel Dumfries and his goal scoring and assist making exploits at the Euros and at the World Cup as well. You know, I was surprised to see Gakpo starting as an out and out striker. I thought he was more of a wide player for PSV. Did very well. I thought we'd see more of Memphis as well up front, considering how well he has played over the last couple of seasons, even though he's lost his place to Lewandowski. All in all, when the Dutch needed to mix it up and go for that long ball and get Burnley's very own Weghorst up front, they did what they needed to do. They went that little bit Route 1 Wimbledon-esque, pulled it all the way back, and then they just couldn't get past them on penalties, could they? And I think whenever you get into a penalty shootout with Argentina, and I'm sure we'll come on to this a little bit later, you probably already mentally lost before the first kick has been taken, especially if you watch the Copa America last year. And they just couldn't handle the pressure, the Dutch. And what a feisty encounter that was.
I mean, in terms of, as you mentioned, the total football Dutch history, kind of the 70s, is how most people see Holland, Netherlands play. The majority of the time, they play this way, which is efficient and some would say quite, you could say aggressive if you were being nice about it. And styles make fights in the boxing parlance, and Holland, Argentina, always that he's going to have an edge to it. I mean, in terms of, I think pretty low on the shot count, Holland during the tournament, chances created, kind of XG, anti-total football, Van Gaal's perspective. But and we'll talk about, I suspect we will talk about this more in for other games in the tournament. But there's been a lot of games during this tournament. People have gone, oh, one of the best games I've ever seen. Brilliant game, absolutely brilliant. When the reality is, for some of those games, were 90 minutes absolutely non-stop, end to end. But a few of those games which go in that category of absolutely brilliant, what people say, they were quite one-sided for most of the game. And what people mean is, oh, what a brilliant 10 minutes there were in that game, or 20 or 30 or 40. That Argentina-Holland game, people say, oh, what a great game, what a great contest. Holland didn't turn up for probably 70 minutes. When I would almost, because I didn't get to watch all of the games in the tournament, but this is one of the ones I was able to watch from start to finish. There was a moment about 70 minutes in where I thought, this is over here. There's nothing happening. Argentina is going to comfortably see this out because Holland got absolutely nothing. What stopped me and thought, okay, no, I can invest in this. I think it was Martin Keown on co-commentary. And he mentioned when they brought Weghorst on, this wasn't the exact quote, but it was along the lines of, what a load of rubbish. Holland have just basically accepted defeat. They're never going to do anything. So I was like, okay, we know how this turns out. And watch football, you play football, and you have the cliche in terms of you want to play the right way, mixed with that contradiction of winning is the most important thing in a lot of scenarios. So you do what you got to do to win, which sometimes can go against the playing philosophy. And that is exactly what happened in the last 20 minutes of that game. But I loved it in terms of it was the simplest tactic you could think of. Get the two big lads up front and hit the ball at them in the air. And there's something quite refreshing in terms of a lot of the top flight football. It's got quicker. There's a lot more space. There's a lot more advantage given to the attacking team in terms of refereeing protection, refereeing decisions as there is now. What I liked about that last 20 minutes, even before my favourite moment, is Argentina knew what was coming. They brought on a centre-back to stop it. Yeah. And they still couldn't stop it. You know, in terms of, you got that absolutely all in the air, all guns blazing. Classic header for the first goal. And then even though this isn't an official award, and we will talk about kind of the official awards later on, if there was an award for the biggest balls of the tournament moment, that free kick for Holland in injury time, last minute, absolutely no one would have thought that ball is going around the back in terms of there's free kicks people remember like kind of direct free kicks, usually straight in. But the best free kicks, I'd say, in terms of those routines where you're like, oh man, nobody saw that coming. And there's not very many in history, like in terms of since I've been watching football that I can remember. Argentina v England, 98 World Cup, that'd be one. This one was even better, considering like in terms of the pressure on the line in that moment. It was the last kick of the game, really. You know that in terms of the person who's standing over the ball, knowing if it does not go in the net in the next 3 seconds, we are out of the World Cup. The balls on that play, to use an American phrase, absolutely unbelievable. And I cheered when that goal went in, I got to admit. But I think the disappointing thing was in terms of you've got that moment of absolute, or kind of use another metaphor. You put your chips all in, kind of all on the table. You've got your payout, and then they didn't really do anything in extra time. Kind of Holland. It was almost in terms of, oh yeah, we kind of got back. Massive effort, to be fair. But then you mentioned penalty shootouts, and kind of Argentina have a fantastic record, which has got to weigh in your mind. The flip of that is Holland have a terrible record at penalties. So playing for penalties can be a tactic that some teams do adopt. But the problem is when you play for penalties, you've then got to go and take them. And if you've got a terrible record and against a team who's got a very good record and, certain dark arts that they will use in a penalty shootout, which we'll probably touch upon later on, then, yeah, it was a shame, really, because Argentina in that, people say in terms of tournaments, you got to go through adversity. The true champions go through adversity, but Argentina were on their knees in terms of after that second goal winning. They were there for the taking, I think. So it was unfortunate that Holland then kind of retreated back a bit in extra time and couldn't quite, well, not unfortunate for you, probably, but kind of unfortunate for me. They didn't quite get the job done, Holland. But in terms of that last 20 minutes of that game and that moment of the World Cup, that goal, absolutely fantastic. So I think but basically what I'm saying is there's just enough in there for us to justify our prediction kind of before the tournament. But the tournament was played, obviously, as we're talking about it. I think there's no real competition for the actual overachievers in the World Cup. I think that has to go to Morocco.
Oh, yeah. Oh, mate, Morocco were a fairy tale fantasy, weren't they, really? And there were a lot of people who wanted Morocco to go all the way at the end and win it. And I think that, I mean, there were probably a lot of Portugal fans who wanted Morocco to go all the way in the end and win it. maybe not French fans, maybe not Argentinian fans or others, but there were definitely a lot. It was a romantic sort of fairy. No, it was fairy tale. It wasn't romantic. That's the other story that we're going to come on to. That's the romantic story. This one, no, you could, buoyed on by Bono, the goalkeeper, Hakimi, Amrabat. What a fantastic tournament he had in the centre of midfield for Morocco, made, really epitomised by that tackle on Kylian Mbappe in the semi-final, where you see Mbappe rolling around on the floor after Amrabat cleanly taken the ball and maybe touched him, but
hello,
a little, but they were great, and it did really have people torn. And if Morocco could have finished third, I think a lot of people would have taken that, but they probably had the wind knocked out of their sails after that defeat to France, because they were riding on the crest of a wave. Their fans were fantastic. To think about the teams that they beat as well to get to where they were. They beat Belgium. They beat Spain, didn't they? They beat Portugal. And Portugal, when you look at their team on paper, potentially had the strongest 11 that any team could have had, from the squad of players that they put out there, when you think of the world-class players that they had. But Morocco, yeah, hats off to them. You hope that they can build on that, go strong in the African Cup of Nations, and then come round to the next World Cup. You're going to have Hakimi, who is going to be there, you'd imagine, still. That some of the other players will also be there, and African football would have been buoyed by this performance, and also the performance of Senegal, who got to the round of 16, And there's some of those big hitters who didn't get there either. Egypt with Mo Salah, who probably won't be at the next World Cup, but you never know. They did African football proud. They were most definitely the overachievers, or not overachieving. It sounds like a bit of a negative connotation, doesn't it? Really, it's true, but they were the standout team at the tournament, the unexpected excellence that there was.
Yep, and as you mentioned, some good young players to build around. And if, same in club football as in international football, if they can find a striker, then I think it was just a couple of chances, kind of, in a semi-final and also in the third place playoff, that if they could have put them away, then who knows what a different situation would have been. But speaking of the third place playoff, you could make an argument that the team who beat Morocco in the third place playoff were overachievers as well, because Croatia, third place, I don't think either of us had them going that far. I think in terms of, especially when the quarterfinal fell, in terms of the draw, there was not a feeling that they were going to get through that. But this is a team that came second in 2018 World Cup, losing to France in the final. Third this time around. I think in terms of a different stage of the journey to Morocco, in terms of age, for one, and also in terms of experience. Modric, in terms of footballing age, kind of remains ageless in terms of dictating the midfield. But yeah, a couple of good young players coming through for Croatia, even though they were beaten by Argentina comfortably in the semi-finals, but defensively up until that point looked solid, you could say. You look at all the teams in the tournament, as we kind of touched upon a few already and touched a few upon more, teams who did not make the semi-finals: Spain, Portugal, England, Belgium. Teams who you might say, well, they got more people in some cases, and potentially more of a footballing history in others, more of an actual history in terms of length of nation in others.
Mm-hmm.
Great performance, you got to say. I mean, Morocco, as you said, they're their own kind of, the out of nowhere story, and the one where they will hopefully, in terms of African football, kind of set the bar and encourage kind of the next, kind of the next stage in the development for kind of some, as you mentioned, some big teams in Africa who've got some talent already. Different type of achievement for Croatia, but I think in terms of the makeup of the squad, they kind of nobody, even though they were the finalists, as I said, nobody thought they would do anything. I think you have to say they overachieved again.
I think it's, looking back at the history of the World Cup over the last 20 or so years, it's actually quite patronising and unfair on Croatia that people say this and that they don't expect them to do well. And when you include the Euros as well, I mean, I can't remember how they did the last Euros, if I'm completely honest. I know they lost to us at one point, but they finished third at the World Cup before within the last 20 years. They've finished second. They got to the final, against France, as you said. And I think if they'd have got to the final again, everybody would have expected the same outcome. And they've come third again this time. They are workhorses. They are a very good team. And they are a team that you need to handle with care, really, when you come to face them, because they should be aiming for at least the quarterfinals, if not further, every year. And I don't think it's fair to say that, they're a one-man team, they're a Luka Modric team. As great as Luka Modric is, and Luka Modric is one of the midfielders of his generation, one of the best midfielders in the world of the last 5 years, despite the fact he played for Spurs. They've got a very good team. As you say, the youngsters that are coming through, I'm going to murder his name, so I'm not even going to try it. But the right back who's at Celtic, he's been fantastic, and he's been linked with a lot of big money moves. And I think Celtic are hoping for a big money transfer to come in for him. Gvardiol played exceptionally well at centre back up until the semi final.
Yep.
Livavkovic, amazing in goal. His penalty exploits were tremendous. Again, up until the semi-final, with the penalty that he gave away. How people don't think that was, I don't know. And then the Julian Alvarez goal was very much like being playing a game of snooker, having the black ball at the end of the table and the white just in front of it, getting your cue, fucking lobbing it just to hit it onto the other thing. I love the goal, to be honest with you. It's one of my favourite of the tournament, just for the pure drive and passion. But they had a lot of good players. Sosa, we know that Russell loves Sosa. He did very well. Brozovic, a good player. The strikers, Kramaric used to play for Leicester, decent enough, but you have to wonder where Dejan Vlahovic was, because he hardly featured. Orsic did very well, scoring in that third place playoff, came on and changed the game against Brazil by all accounts. They did very, very well, and they deservedly got to where they got to. You would have expected some of the more fancy names, as you say, Spain, Portugal, England, Belgium, Brazil, Germany, to have got to the semi-finals ahead of them. But, anybody who can rock a red and white checkered kit, they deserve to get as far as they want to go in the World Cup.
They're a tactically well-drilled team, and you gotta be on it to get a result against them. And any slight slippage in terms of your performance or belief in terms of thinking that you can roll them over,
definitely,
you will get punished.
One thing I completely forgotten, I'm sorry for interrupting you. So the FIFA World Rankings have come out again today. They weren't meant to come out till the 22nd, but apparently they've come out today. If I told you that Croatia is 7th in the world rankings, would you think that they've been hard done by?
Well, let's have a fun game. I'm guessing you've got the rankings in front of you. I'll have a fun game of trying to get
top 9. I've got the top 9.
Yeah, I'll try and have a fun game of guessing who's going to be above Croatia in the rankings, because I think that might help in terms of answer the question in my mind as to whether they're hard done by in 7th. So
Okay.
I'm going to hazard a guess Argentina are above them in the rankings. They number 1 now. I mean, well, they're world champions, so no. So I'm guessing Brazil are they above them?
Yep.
France.
Yep.
England. Are we above them?
Yep.
Okay, so how many have I got? 4. So there's the two more to go. Portugal. Are they above them?
Nope.
Guess they're below. Spain.
Nope.
Okay. So, well, I'm guessing it's not Germany. I wouldn't have thought.
Nope.
Okay, so there's 4. I don't think Uruguay.
No.
I'm probably missing a couple of obvious ones here, but who are the other 2?
So 9th are Portugal. Okay, that was the I saw the top 9. Spain, Germany, Uruguay. They're not in there at all. 9th for Portugal. In 8th place, despite not even featuring at the World Cup.
Oh yeah.
And having a very shoddy World Cup record, really. I know they've won it a couple of times, but when they haven't won it, they've been quite shoddy.
I prefer their record. They won it 4 times. So in terms of
yeah, to be fair. Italy. Then you got Croatia. 1 place above Croatia are the Netherlands.
Yeah, I thought that.
England are 5th. Dropping 2 places to 4 for Belgium.
Okay. Belgium.
3rd are France.
So yeah, we'll come on to Belgium.
2nd, the champions of the world and of South America, Argentina. And top, and I do not know how they're top, of Brazil. But yeah, I mean, Croatia have gone up 5 places. Yep. You'd expect, if you saw like the whole of this at the world rankings, that you'd expect to see that maybe somebody like Australia had climbed up a little bit because they had a decent tournament. But yeah, I mean, to think that Belgium and England and Holland are ranked higher than Croatia is a little bit silly, really, in my opinion. I'd have Croatia at least in my top 3, I think.
I'd definitely have them above Belgium.
They're definitely, they'd be top 5 if not top 3. You know, I can't think of many other teams who are better than them in the world. Well, I can think of 1.
Yeah. Is it Belgium? No. I above Holland as well. So yeah, I could see 5. I mean, technically top 5 because 5th is top 5. But yeah, I mean, in terms of there is going to be in that pressure kind of on them now to see if they can maintain it. But as you said, they've got a very good tournament record over a significant number of years. So we will see well, we assume they're qualified for the World Cup 2026 because everybody's allowed in 2026. It's a never-ending World Cup, but no, very good team, underestimated. Not the best segue, or is it? I'll leave it for you to decide. In terms of, we've mentioned the teams that have got to the semi-final. We mentioned teams which did not get that far. One of those teams which did not get to the semi-finals and went out exactly when and how we said they would in the quarterfinals, losing to France, England.
Yeah.
We predicted this before the tournament, so in that literal sense, that is not a surprise. But in terms of how England got there and the way that they played in the tournament, was it a surprise to you? Was it different to how you're expecting? Or was it very much a prediction in terms of, in the preview episode, to paraphrase what you said, was basically, we'll get to the quarterfinals and Southgate will get tactically outclassed. Is that what you think happened for England in this World Cup?
Yeah, I do. Southgate, he's got a very good record tournament-wise. He's done very well. Considering how many games we'd won in tournaments pre-Southgate to how many he has won, those stats are all flying round. He's doing a very good job. I think there's arguments both sides for whether he's appropriate for the job as England manager, such as would he get a job at one of the top Premier League teams? No, he wouldn't. Does he do well for England? Does he bring the players together to form that much of a unity that they can express themselves and go out and do the job? Yes, he does. And when you look at the decisions that he made, and he made some really big decisions going into that tournament, taking Kyle Walker when he wasn't 100% fit. Kyle Walker played very well in the match that he played. We know that Trent was only there because James was injured. He took Calvin Phillips. He still should have left Calvin Phillips at home. He did absolutely nothing. James Maddison will be wondering why he was taken, but thanking Gareth Southgate for taking him on a free holiday to Qatar.
He got injured, didn't he? At exactly the wrong time.
He did, but he could have had a few minutes against Senegal, and he could have been brought on to try and unlock something against France. If we really wanted to win that quarter final, we could have thrown everything at France in the end, which I don't think we did. I think he left it too late to make the changes again, and that's where he's tactically inept. Jack Grealish had less game time in this World Cup than he did in the Euros, and he was criminally underrated by Southgate at the Euros. Phil Foden should have been on the pitch a lot more. Why are you taking him off? Saka played very well. Marcus Rashford should have come on a lot sooner against France. Rashford had a new lease of life. His free kick against Wales, you just knew before he took it that it was going in. It was like having David Beckham stood over the ball again. Fantastic, that direct style of running that he had. Though in his defence, two of the decisions that he made were spot on. One we all thought would be, and that was Jude Bellingham. The emergence of that young man this season has been nothing short of breathtaking. And it's not easy to say as a Villa fan, but he is going to be a world-class generational talent for many years to come, and he's nowhere near his peak yet.
He's a fantastic player, and in terms of, I remember before the Euro, I would have had him started at the Euros. So in terms of obviously that extra year of development, made a massive difference. You could tell in terms of his performance, but also his attitude as well. In terms of, you can't coach really mentality or leadership, and considering he's one of the youngest players, I think he was the youngest player in the team, showing real leadership qualities. I know, he wasn't the captain, but in terms of going over to Kane after he missed the penalty against France, for example, you have. It doesn't matter in terms of, for me, playing for Blues. I mean, he left like very early on in his career in the grand scheme of things. Played for Dortmund a few years, and from an England perspective, if the best 11 English players all play for Birmingham City, I'd have them playing for Blues. I mean, luckily for me, I don't have to worry about that because Blues are terrible. But in terms of him playing for Blues, no, I mean, I don't monitor the Twitter pages as much as you do, but I don't think there's been too much in terms of Villa fans going, I don't want Bellingham to do well because he was from Blues. I think most recognise the fact when he puts an England shirt on, as we hope he does a lot more in the future, just because he's, as you say, he's a generational player. So he was a big positive in this World Cup. I agree.
If anybody is going to captain an England team to their next trophy, or whoever that is going to be, your best chance is Jude Bellingham being that man wearing the armband, lifting the trophy, and it would not shock me at all. I said in the pre-World Cup recording, he's 22. as a shirt number because he can play those three midfield positions equally as well as one another. You saw him chasing everything down. He was fantastic, and you could say that he was our player of the tournament. I probably would say that he was our player of the tournament.
Yep, you go with
But
that.
I think you have to give strong applause, and you have to say well done to the player who nobody thought should be there, who came in to the central of defence with his floppy hair, playing alongside John Stones. Okay, probably could have done a bit better for the goal that went in where we got knocked out, but Harry
Yep.
Maguire had a fantastic tournament as well.
I have to disagree with you there, and I am
Oh,
I am
okay.
in the minority here. I know this, and I know in terms of before the tournament, we were even thinking we might play it free at the back just to try and cover up Maguire. And I agree with you. He had a decent tournament. He wasn't, terrible. There's no kind of absolute disgrace, kind of moments, like getting sent off in 10 minutes, I think, like he did against Germany a couple of months ago. But there was always the worry that when we came against the big teams, defensively, we would be found lacking a little bit. And England conceded 3 goals in the tournament, two against France, or was it 4? It was
Yeah, Iran, 2 against Iran.
2 against Iran, 2 against France. 2 of those goals were Maguire's fault. If you're being critical, which we are, well, I am.
Mm-hmm.
When you're at that, we're at the world class level, that top level of football, the margins for error are less and less. And Maguire, and I'm not saying, you mentioned earlier Tyrone Mings might stop the header. Maybe not. I'm not saying it's because Maguire's a terrible player, and the biggest moments he got beat when he shouldn't have got beat. If we're being hyper truthful or critical, or whichever way you want to look at it, a better centre back would have stopped that header from Giroud. I think where it comes to in terms of England at the moment, as we kind of touched upon with Tyrone Mings, kind of jokingly, did we have another centre back who you could have played to say, oh yeah, they definitely would have fantastic, they would have stopped everything coming away? That is an area of weakness for England at the moment because we don't, in terms of that centre back pool. So I think in terms of Maguire, it wasn't what we said would happen actually did happen in terms of when push came to shove, he would make a mistake, but it was just in terms of the margins were a lot finer than what we thought they were going to be. Like he didn't have a situation where his shorts fell down and any clowning type position. But in terms of it has to be, and it's easy to say this in terms of it's common sense, but doesn't help in terms of actually finding the solution or how this is going to be. If England are going to be legitimate World Cup contenders, we need a world-class centre-back, and we haven't got one at the moment. And I think in terms of you can't find one off the back of a sofa, down the back of the sofa, but I think in terms of so it's semantics, I suppose, with Maguire. He didn't have a terrible tournament. He had a decent tournament, but at the big moments, he was found lacking. That's my view. But in terms of could anybody have done better, you can, Connor Cody was too busy organising Uno games or whatever he was meant to be doing in terms of that squad. But
I don't understand why they take people who definitely aren't going to play. And I do mean to interrupt you because I'm putting a different point across. But why take Connor Cody when you know he's not going to get game time unless you're 9-0 up against the Albanian under-16s,
Yep.
Whereas you could take somebody who, in my opinion, will probably be starting alongside John Stones or somebody else in the next tournament, and that's for KO Tomori. Why not take Tomori? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at the next tournament if we saw Tomori and Gay as the two centre-backs for England. But then again, Southgate has got to show that he's got confidence in other people who aren't his main ones. I completely get your point about Maguire, really do. And he was at fault for the goal against Iran, where he went straight up past Pickford. But in the grand scheme of things, don't really matter too much. We still won that one. He got across well with Giroud. He was unfortunate. He deflected off his shoulder and went in, but it is those fine margins. You're correct. You're spot on. You know, you want him to be getting there so that it's not hitting his shoulders, so it's hitting another part of his body, or he's getting his head there ahead of him first. The problem is that England don't have any centre backs like that unless they can convert somebody like a Calvin Phillips into a centre back and he plays more than 17 minutes. You know, for whoever he joins after not playing much for Man City before the next European Championships. But we'll see. Overall, though, I think we both agree that, or we might not now actually, that Jude Bellingham was the England player of the tournament.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in terms of, because the Euros is 18 months away rather than 24, I think it's more likely that the starting centre-back partnership will be Maguire and Stones if we qualify. Because I think in terms of our first qualifying game is away in Italy, I think. So you're probably not going to, I mean, you might play Tomori because, you know, you can stay around his house after the game. But in terms of, you're probably going to go with the experienced centre-back. You're probably not going to want to throw somebody in for their debut against Italy, especially being as though Italy watching the World Cup on the sidelines. You know, they'll be keen to make sure that they qualify for the next major tournament. But I think in terms of, there's a lot to unpack about England, and in terms of, there's case, as you mentioned, case for the defense, whichever way you want to look at it, case for kind of the pro Southgate, anti Southgate, is staying until the Euros. That's been announced this week. I think in terms of the preview episode, I said there might be a situation where he'd walk. I think it was very close from what we can tell in terms of whether he's going to walk. I think in terms of a point you made in respect of, he doesn't walk into a top job in the Premier League at the moment, I think that's a factor in terms of staying around. I think the fact that the qualifiers for the Euros start in March, I think is another factor, because, you know, in terms of get straight back into it, the opportunity to further develop this group of players is a very appealing one in terms of Southgate, in terms of, you know, I think there's a feeling for him, it's like he started the job, he wants to finish it, in terms of this group of players could potentially be coming into their peak, probably 2026, I'd hazard a guess. But yeah, there's certainly, you'd say, in terms of quality on a trajectory, I think that is a factor as to why he stayed. I think also there's an element of the FA made clear to him that they hadn't even considered who would take over next. And I think in terms of Southgate came up through that England system, he, well, caretaker to begin with from recollection, interim manager. So a sense of duty, really, I think would be a factor for him, not wanting to leave England in the lurch 3 months before a big game. But I do think in terms of, as I said, I agree with you that he would not get a job like the top clubs in the Premier League, but I don't think that necessarily disqualifies him from being kind of remaining as England manager, because I think they're two very different jobs, you know, in terms of, if you're going to say who could be a better coach, there's probably plenty of names that we could rattle off in terms of who might be a better coach. I mean, we named a couple in the preview, and unfortunately, they had the crime of not being English. So, in terms of Tuchel, Pochettino, you know, absolutely outrageous, I know. In terms of, you know, Graham Potter, you mentioned. People have mentioned Eddie Howe. After somebody has mentioned Steven Gerrard, and in terms of you, and I know you're a fan of this pundit, and I'm not a fan of this pundit. And in terms of this, did cement kind of my, they're already cemented, you know. How do you cement? further. But Jamie Redknapp gave an interview a couple of days ago, basically saying Southgate's terrible. Why is everybody clamoring for Southgate to stay? You only got to the quarters. That's rubbish. Kind of with the players we got, we should have gone better, which are arguments which have been made. And I think, in terms of off air, it's similar position to what you might perhaps feel in terms of, can't say that we overachieved. Well, we could potentially underachieve. But he did go on, and where I lost kind of well, I say lost respect, it indicates I had some in the first place. But he said in the interview that Steven Gerrard would have done a better job than Gareth Southgate. We've spent a lot of recent time on this podcast detailing about how Steven Gerrard is not the tactical messiah in terms of his managerial style, and very hot take, fresh out of the oven that I'm bringing here. You could say that Gerrard's managerial success was largely based upon having Michael Beale kind of next to him, and then as soon as Beale left, it all kind of fell to the proverbial. So to say Steven Gerrard could have done a better job than Gareth Southgate, I do think is apt to, we're recording this a little later in the evening, so I'm going to drop some industrial language in as a warning to our younger listeners. But to say that Gerrard would do a better job than Southgate is absolute bollocks, frankly. In terms of, I'm not, and he also said Frank Lampard, which again is also absolute bollocks, but not quite to the same extent. But Southgate, in terms of, is he the best coach? No. But he's not a coach in terms of, that is not necessarily the primary thing that you need in an international team. He's the best, as you mentioned, I think he's the best manager for this group of players in terms of the time he's been there. Players kind of have owed their international careers to him. They kind of like him. There's good team spirit. I mean, historically for England teams, the golden generation you mentioned earlier, all the talk was all the players hated each other, because they were from kind of mainly the big four clubs at the time, and it was absolutely awful, and they couldn't wait to leave, and didn't really care kind of if England won or lost. A lot of things you could say about this England team, but that's not one of them now, I would say. I think in terms of that started under Southgate's watch, in terms of the players wanting to win as a team, play as a team, taking, kind of pride in each other's performances, regardless of what team they play for. And I do think in terms of, everybody loves a narrative nowadays, don't they? In terms, you can't just have somebody doing their job. There's got to be like a reason or a motivation, or, got to get back at someone or whatever. I do think they will go for 2024. It will be like the farewell tour for Southgate. It's like, it's all been building up to this moment, got to get behind him. This is going to be the end game, the last dance, in terms of Southgate's England manager. I think that will be the feel going into it. It's like, this is the culmination. His contract ends December 2024. I think people will get behind that narrative of, it's all about this one. This is the tournament. This is the one. This is where, we're going to be coming into the peak. And we've got to get there first, kind of, as I mentioned. I think just the timing of the qualifying helps Southgate, even though, kind of tournaments comes around very quickly. But I think in terms of, we did think before the tournament that he'd play quite defensive, negative football when we played somebody good. To his credit, he didn't. I think in terms of, we went toe-to-toe with France. And I think in terms of, we've got a history in tournaments of losing to bigger countries by basically going negative, trying to cling on for dear life and hope to nick a goal. And you can't say we did that against France. I think we were a better team. We had our chances and we didn't take them. That's a simple situation in terms of the summary of the game. We should have got extra time. If you're going to say before the game, you got a penalty with 5 minutes to go, Harry Kane over the ball. If he scores, you get extra time. Will you take it? You will take that before the game, I think, in the current situation. So we got ourselves in place and just didn't execute. I mean, in terms of, there are other factors, you could throw in there. The ref was awful. But in terms of, it's the classic cliche in terms of football. There was a free kick that should have been given down at the other end, but you still got the whole length of the pitch to defend, which we didn't. First French goal didn't close down well enough. Keeper could have saved it. Kind of the fine margins, really. You can't blame Southgate for that. As you mentioned, the substitutions, I agree with you in terms of if you're going to have the blots on the Southgate copybook, that they were poor in a quarter final in terms of not necessarily the players who came on, but the time. I mean, Grealish, as you mentioned, came on in the 98th minute. That's waste of time. I mean, you might as well brought on Connor Cody. Try to distract the French, kind of with that handheld game where like you press or you pull or you push, kind of those sounds kind of come out just to try and create an opening. So yes, the subs he did not get right in that occasion, but there's also an element of Southgate's favourites. That was kind of before the tournament, thinking, yep, some players are going to get picked, whatever. And we mentioned Maguire being one of them, and kind of the viewpoint was he justified the pick. Most people think that. In terms of, I've got a bit of a more nuanced view, but there was enough change in the tournament, I think, to say beginning to move away kind of on mentality. I mean, Sterling started the first game. We thought he would because Southgate favourite. Then didn't really play too much more. I mean, obviously some difficult personal circumstances meant he had to go and then come back. I mean, I think personally he shouldn't have come on against France. That's, another poor substitution. But there was a clamour for Foden, started against Wales. He then stayed in the team and he had a decent tournament. He had his moments. Yet you do think he is going to be part of that future England team, you'd hope, for the next 10 years at least. And that midfield three, I mean, in terms of the balance, we mentioned Bellingham, big part of that, but bringing in Henderson did the job, in terms of that. I wouldn't have even had him on the plane. So in terms of bringing him in when he didn't start the tournament, Henderson. So different variety there in the selection. Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of when you get that close in a quarterfinal, and when you do get to a quarterfinal, then you go out, especially being England have the record for going out in the quarterfinals the most times in the World Cup, 7, I believe. So they all kind of merge into one eventually, and you kind of think, oh yeah, another quarterfinal, kind of all that. And I think people look at Morocco and kind of think, oh god, we could have, maybe we would have beat Morocco, probably. Don't matter really in the grand scheme of things. We didn't get to play them, so you never know. But I think there was enough for me in terms of tactical variation. There's elements to improve on, obviously, in terms of we mentioned, and if we can carry on making those developments, I think it'll be one or two outcomes. We'll either win the Euros, and everybody will say what an absolute genius Gareth Southgate is, and he'll be knighted, and kind of hopefully we'll get the day off, which is always good. Or we'll get knocked out if we qualify for the tournament, which you suspect, well, you hope we will. Though we are due a once in a generation not qualifying for a tournament, so beware. Or it'll be we get knocked out in the semis, quarters, whatever it is, and there'll be a definitive. This is as far as Southgate can take us. The contract's up at the end. Let's part. He would have been in the job 8 years by that point. There's a more mutual parting of the ways. We've had 18 months to try and find a successor, because now the FA have finally realised that Southgate might actually leave. So like, oh, balls. We actually need to go and try and find somebody. So yeah, he's earned the last dance for me, and I think we're all in. We're going to be either celebrating with Free Lions Euro 26, Euro 2024 version, whatever monstrosity that will end up being, or there will be Jamie Redknapp will be writing an article in July 2024 saying, "I told you so. I told you Southgate was crap," and whichever reality we end up in, that's the one I'm going to end up. But yeah, I mean, I think in terms of England, there was enough positivity for me, but realising that there are areas that both Southgate has to improve, and so does the team. And we've got to hope we find a magic centre back in the next couple of years.
If he is less stubborn and he makes his substitutions 10 or 15 minutes earlier, we have a genuinely good chance of winning the Euros. I do believe that. I think that we could do that. We've shown before that we, as you say, that we can mix it with the big boys. We beat Germany in the Euros, went toe to toe with France. You know, there were, as you say, there were decisions in that game which were fine margins and whatnot. Yet on the same token, I can see us getting knocked out to Hungary in the Euros, or getting, and I'm going to point this out now, and I appreciate that there are a million teams at the next World Cup. Hungary will be at the next World Cup. Germany, I could see beating us, and they're crap. They won't even qualify for the Euro. Well, they will qualify for the Euros because it's in Germany. But you know, they're crap. They'll probably beat us. There's enough there. I've never been too bothered with international football. I've never proclaimed to be the big England supporter. I'm not a Billy Luff with a big red St George's cross across my belly. You know, that's not me. I'll watch the games if a Villa player's playing. I watched the games this time. I had a vested interest in a couple of teams this time, if I'm being completely honest. We'll see. We'll see. But speaking of that, and I'll do this little link if you like. Speaking of not being too enamoured, there's another nation that probably aren't too enamoured with their international team. The Germans. I mean, we thought they were going to underachieve, but boy, did they underachieve. They did worse than either of us thought. We both put them to come round of 16, if I remember correctly, at least, or
Yep.
you know,
we both had them getting out of the group.
yeah,
Again, that did not happen. I mean, I think in terms of 2018, they didn't get out of the group, and there was a lot of retrospective looking back, going, yeah, you could have seen that coming. You know, in terms of they've had some issues for a while. 2022, don't get out of the group. Exactly the same thing you could say happened again in terms of looking back and going, yeah, you got to see how that happened, really. I mean, absolutely crazy last group stage, couple of games they were involved in, you know, in terms of all four teams were going through at various points during the course of the evening. Absolutely crazy. And in terms of them scoring goals to put Spain through, I mean, that's absolutely, you know, kind of a crazy combination of events. But yeah, I mean, you have to say in terms of the Germans, a few of the older players coming to the end of their international careers, Manuel Neuer, you'd have to suspect won't be playing in another tournament again. I mean, he's broke his leg, hasn't he, after the tournament, gone skiing. In terms of
yeah,
that situation, you think maybe, but he'll have one last season at Bayern, I suspect, next year. But you know, you'd have to think in terms of internationally. 2024, maybe, as you said, because it's a home tournament, maybe that might drag him along, perhaps. But they got some good young players. I mean, in terms of Musala, centre midfield, if I haven't butchered that, very good player. And you know, in terms of there's some sparks, but there is a bit, you know, in terms of a bit too much in terms of not enough speed, not enough variety, kind of in that team. I mean, in terms of, as I said, we both predict them to go out of the groups. It's still a bit of a surprise in that regard, but I think it's always hard to feel too sorry for the Germans, because you know that they'll have a plan in place to actually sort it out. Because in terms of Euro 2000, they lost to England in the group stage. Both England and Germany went out in that tournament. Germany in the final of the World Cup 2 years later. Not of a great German team, but, you know, kicked in tournament football brains. They win the World Cup later on, 2014. Young players having come through the system in Germany, you know, regional football, regional youth football really put their money into it, and that gave them the competitive advantage. There's going to be a plan for the Germans. They do need a reset. I think in terms of maybe the fact that the Bundesliga is won by Bayern every year. And, in terms of Bayern have been a dominant team for a long time in Germany, so it's not new, but I think they've won it like 7 years in a row. I think the amount of dominance is a bit unprecedented because kind of round about the end of the 2000s, like Wolfsburg, I think they won the Bundesliga. Yeah, Dortmund, they won the Bundesliga. So there's a little bit of competition. It doesn't help, I don't think, in terms of Bayern's hegemony, which is only going to continue in terms of, it's not the Super League, but, in terms of this new European competition group stage, kind of it's geared towards keeping the bigger teams in for as long as possible. So that won't be helpful. But yeah, home tournament helps Germany for 2024 because you always get a home, and that's your Qatar, you get a home crowd bounce. So that will get them through a couple of games, and they don't have to play Japan. So that helped them. But yeah, they were underachievers. But in terms of, I think, well, for me, because this is one of the few predictions I actually got right in terms of the underachievers of the tournament, for me, they were Belgium, and exactly why I thought they would underachieve is exactly why they underachieved. So I did get them out of the group in terms of the predictions, but I did have them going out in the second round. So they even underachieved my underachievedness. So I don't even kind of know what that makes it. But yeah, I don't think there's really too much more I could say about Belgium than what I predicted in advance. Too old, too slow. Manager kind of at his peak, I think, in terms of, I do believe Martinez, he's not, I'm not going to say he's a chump, he's not a terrible, awful manager, but some people might say this about Southgate. When we get the end of the line with Southgate, we'll see if this opinion comes out. He had a generational group of players that made him look better than what he was, really, in terms of Martinez. And when those players were no longer able to play at those high levels, then he didn't have enough tactically to turn it around. But, in terms, we mentioned the England team having, a good squad mentality. It didn't look like that for Belgium kind of by the end, because you can have in terms of players just trying whatever they can and they're not working, but maybe it was linked to them losing, maybe it's why they lost, but they didn't look particularly like they wanted to be there but by the end, which you're not really going to win too many games. But I kind of saw it coming. You didn't see it coming. You had them in the final, I think, from recollection. But was it truly shocking for you what you were seeing unravel before your eyes for Belgium?
Mate, I thought they were going to get to the fucking final, so I was a little bit shocked.
If you're being positive, they only lost one game, I think, if you're being positive.
Well, I mean, when you hear about all the discord that there was behind the scenes there and whatnot, it's no wonder that that they didn't do very well at all. But they, like Germany, have got a good crop of youngsters, mid-20s ish, that can go again and can, with the right manager and with the right system, can be challengers, at the Euros. I think, just quickly going back to Germany, I think that you're right about Neuer and Muller. If they can get rid of them and start bringing through to Stargen and Musliara, and I tell you this, if Marco Reus finally makes it to an international tournament for them, I think that they'll win back the heart of the nation by getting to at least the semi-finals, and that will be good for them. Belgium, though, they've got some cracking players. They've got Dendoncker, of course, obviously, but they've got the likes of Tielemans.
Next captain, Dendoncker.
Yeah, they've got Tielemans, they've got De Bruyne, who will be 33 at that point, but this World Cup's shown that for midfielders or attackers, age is just a number. They've got to work on their defence, because their defence is pretty much over the hill. I mean, Alderweireld and Vertonghen were top quality defenders 5 years ago at Spurs. That time has gone, and they were starting to fall apart then. When Premier League big boys start getting rid of you, you're coming to the end of your days, really, at the highest level. But we'll see. We'll see, But yeah, to answer your question, I was quite shocked by them. I thought they'd walk their group, to be completely honest with you. But you get what you deserve. You get what you deserve, and they deserved to go home early. Though, problem for the rest of the Premier League is the best midfielder in the world has had a bit more of a rest than he thought he was going to have. And he's
Yeah.
going to be supplying the best striker in the world, who's had a very long rest.
Yeah, that is worrying from a title chase perspective.
I worry about our title challenge now, I tell you.
I know. Well, luckily your predictions can keep us right up there. But you look in terms of Arsenal, top of the league at the moment, but Jesus out injured for a few months is a suspicion that time recording. As you mentioned, Haaland has been sitting back, having a rest for the next months. Yeah. I suspect that he's only going to go one way. But in terms of going one way, the right way, you predicted Belgium to get to the final. They did not.
No.
You also predicted Argentina to get to the final.
I did.
And they did. So 1 out of 2 ain't bad. And the final, you had Argentina on one side. I had France on the other. And that was a dramatic pause for those listening. And whilst I navigate my way to the end of the sentence, Argentina-France final was all right, wasn't it?
Argentina-France final. Sorry, I should have picked up a lot more before you had to mute yourself then. Argentina-France final. Now, I've watched a few World Cup finals, obviously. Not as many as you. I haven't liked football as long. And I've not... So there's no hidden joke there about ages because we're the same age. That has got... And I've watched a lot of football finals. That has got to be one of, if not the best final of football that I've ever seen. And I think what you mentioned earlier about how there were a lot of amazing games, great games, there were. It was a fantastic World Cup. Qatar didn't deserve to have a World Cup as fantastic as this, with the games, with the moments that there were, whether they were 10-minute spells or whether they were full-blown halves or games of football. But that final was something else. I mean, the fact that Argentina were just cutting through France, they were swashbuckling, to use a pirate term, in that first half. That Angel Di Maria goal was a thing of beauty. It was poetry in motion, the build-up. The penalty, the first one for Messi, and all the records that got broken in that minute that he took that penalty, and scored it. Fantastic. And then suddenly, with 10 minutes left, despite looking like they were getting better because of Thuram coming on, because of the number 12, whose name, for the life of me, I can't remember the double name. I'm sure you'll...
Villa's new number 9.
Yeah, mate. They really they gave a power to France. And France just looked so powerful at the end, and they didn't give up. Otamendi, what a plonker, giving away that penalty. Mbappe took it brilliantly. Martinez very nearly kept it out. The equalising goal was a sumptuous volley. It's got to be one of the best goals in a World Cup final, just for the volley and the technique and the importance of it. And then when you get into extra time, I really felt like Argentina was still going to do it. I felt like they were going to win it in extra time. Messi's goal, as soon as it went in, I think I texted everybody in the group actually, and I went, offside, won't count. And you realise that actually he wasn't offside because of Lautaro Martinez. And then, of course, Mbappe gets another chance with a penalty, though nobody mentions the fact that some French player had flicked it on with his hand to Mbappe before he hit it at Montiel's elbow. And then, of course, Gonzalo Montiel, that football manager legend that he is, goes and gives away a penalty, but in a cruel twist of fate, goes and scores the winning penalty as well. But you've got to say that there were a lot of players who made that final what it was, who really brought that final to life. And four of them, you could argue, all began with the letter M. And that's Montiel for the giving away the penalty and scoring the penalty. You've got Mr. Mbappe, who, you know what, fair play to him, taking two penalties in a World Cup final. Taking two penalties in a match is hard for some people,
Nope.
you know. But to do that, to score four times, really, in that whole tournament, he's shown that he's the next world superstar.
Yep.
You've got Mr. Martinez. Dave will be proud of him. You know, he was everything you expected him to be in that penalty shootout. And straight away, when you look at the psychology behind everything that he did, he gave them that massive advantage. But the final belonged really, and the whole tournament belonged to Lionel Messi, in my opinion. I know I bum off him, but you know, he was out of this world throughout it.
I mean, in terms of the final, you could say similar to an extent to the Argentina-Holland game mentioned earlier. In terms of, I think in terms of France, they didn't turn up in the first half. You know, pretty one of the worst performances in the first half, or any half of a World Cup final that I can remember. Deschamps made the big changes before halftime. Kolo Muani was the other striker who came along tram, and I agree they did make the difference. But 70 minutes in, 75 minutes in, didn't look like it was making enough of a difference, you know, in terms of Argentina could have won that game fairly comfortably. If they would have put the foot down. I mean, they took Di Maria off. I mean, maybe because he wasn't quite fit. That could be a factor. But I think there was a feeling that they'd won the game, really, Argentina. And as soon as that bit of pressure started coming back, it was like the tidal wave in terms of Argentina. But what I would say in terms of why I won't equate that game quite to the Argentina game is in terms of for a final or any big game, you look at the big players and it's like, okay, what if like they performed to like the top of their ability, if they absolutely kind of went, you know, head to head, absolutely crazy, you know, like Street Fighter style. And you very rarely get a game where just the top players come out and leave it all on the field and give what they got. And you did get that, Messi and Mbappe. I mean, in terms of I agree. The second goal from Mbappe, you know, I think people say, "Oh, Martinez should have saved it." I think, to be honest, Martinez didn't expect it to come, and I think it's that split second of, "Oh shit," and it's kind of gone. It's gone through him. I think I give that the quality of the finish. I mean, in terms of how many players could actually have pulled that off, and I don't think you're looking at very many. And you know, in terms of having their own personal battle for the golden boot going on during that game was, you know, kind of something to behold in itself. And I think in terms of they kept going at it in extra time. I mean, France, you could say they should have won, you know, in terms of that chance right at the end, whereby they, you know, it was a great, well, Martinez good positioning, you know, got that save. And in terms of Messi, yeah, I mean, it's good to know in terms of we like to stay up on top of, you know, kind of rule changes in football with a cutting edge. It was good to learn during the World Cup that a new rule has gone into the rule book that Messi cannot be booked under any circumstance, whatever he does. Kick as many players as you like. Go and kick the ball, boy, for all we care. You're not getting booked because you lean on Messi. So, flippancy aside, there was not everybody, but got to win it for Messi this tournament. You know, if they don't win it, then, you know, it's the worst kind of thing always in the world ever. But there was kind of some people kind of, maybe there was a feeling of Argentina might, you know, have to carry him a bit kind of in this tournament, but he carried them. I think in terms of very similar to, well, with one exception, I've got I got a steaming hot take that I'm going to bring in a moment, subject to one exception. Messi carried that team, really. I mean, it's in terms of the Argentina, they were solid. They were, they kind of workmanlike. Di Maria had a good game in the final. The one exception, and my hot take, Martinez had more of an influence on Argentina winning that World Cup than Lionel Messi. That is my hot, steaming take in terms of the penalties in the quarterfinal against Holland and in the final, great saves during the course of the game. And you mentioned in terms of psychology during the penalty shootout, some of it was not psychology. Some of that was just pure, good old-fashioned shithousery. In terms of, I think it was before the third penalty where he just picked up the ball from the spot and just like lobbed it kind of off the field. Before that's not psychology. That's just, I'm going to be a dick and I'm going to try and get in your head. And yeah, it worked just well enough from an Argentinian perspective, and he saved saved penalty as well. I do think there's an element in terms of, I mean, I'll get shot out of town in respect of Messi scoring, obviously, enough goals to kind of have the golden boot for a moment, and he did win the player of the tournament. We'll come on to a moment as to whether somebody may have predicted that or not. But very much at both ends of the pitch, that was one for Argentina, Messi, Martinez. And from a Villa perspective, Martinez, first Villa player to play in a World Cup final. And also by default now, the first Villa player to win in a World Cup final. So in terms of that. So I brought them in the Messi Martinez debate, and they did get individual awards. Martinez won the Golden Glove, which you predicted. And Messi won the Player of the Tournament, which you also predicted. I kind of covered my bets a little by saying if Argentina won the tournament, then Messi would win Player of the Tournament, which was factually accurate. But, I did have Brazil to win the tournament, and they didn't. So, you get the credit for that one in terms of the Holy Trinity. Talk of the Trinity, some would say you are. The winners, the Golden Glove and the Player of the Tournament. And to complete the rectangle, the Golden Boot, which you also had as well. I mean, unfortunately, we recorded our preview episode just before it was announced that Karim Benzema would be out of the tournament and not play. Although there was that crazy rumor that he would actually fly back in and play for the final, which, did turn out to be terrible, which you can understand why that would be. I did try and recover my respectability by saying it would be a French player, which turned out to be correct. But you did get all four. I hope you went down the bookies to get yourself a nice little fourfold on that. I'm assuming you didn't, otherwise you wouldn't be here probably. You'd be in Qatar so celebrating that right now. But I'll give you the limelight a little here in terms of Argentina. Was your prediction. You've been banging on about Argentina all year. And you were right, to be fair. But in terms of my Martinez, Messi, you're kind of dropping that in there. Was Martinez just as integral as Messi for Argentina winning that tournament? Or was it as you anticipated before the tournament, which was, this is going to be Messi, Messi's going to do it?
Well, first of all, it's very nice to hear you say that I was right. So thank you. It's not the first time, no. I'm not a TikTok time traveling twat. I am a human, spoiler alert. Let me just point that out to you. Steven Gerrard, next Aston Villa manager, 3-1 against Man United at home. Argentina, Messi, Mbappe, Martinez. What can I say? Anyway, enough of that, because my head won't fit on the camera because of my ears anyway. I can see what you're saying with Martinez, though I do also feel that Martinez could have done better against Saudi Arabia with the goals that he let in. He's got a habit of letting the same types of goals in, usually free kicks where he doesn't move his arms, deflected efforts that go over his head, or ones that just bend away from him into the top corner. But saying that, you want Emi Martinez in goal in a penalty shootout against Holland. The save from Van Dijk, the other save that he made from the other Dutch player, you know, the save that he made from Kingsley Coman, the way he just commanded that area. And I read something on Twitter that while Hugo Lloris and Messi were deliberating the coin toss, Martinez deliberately went to the penalty area, jeered the Argentina fans up, and as Lloris approached, he walks out, stretches out his hand as if, welcome to my house. You know, this is my penalty area. And then the mind games began. They started very small with, is that on the spot properly, ref? Yep, it is. Okay, thank you. You know, and then the second one, is that on the spot properly, ref? Let me just check as well. And then the third one, where we just lobbed the ball away. And at that point, every French player must have been thinking, oh, bloody hell. Oh, bloody hell. But with the Holland game, it was a bit different. Yeah, okay, while he was giving it the big I am and all of that, it's not hard to forget that, or remember that the Dutch players, when you see the aerial view from behind the goal, they were walking over towards the Argentina players before each of their penalties and saying things to them. And they were trying to get in their head. The problem is, you're doing that a good 30 seconds to a minute before that penalty is being taken. Emi Martinez is there looking you in the eye, telling you that you're shit right up till the last second.
And that was one of the nicer things he said, probably, no doubt.
Well, that's it, you know. And then again in the final, the way he celebrated saving the Coman penalty, it was, I half thought about like shouting to him, mate, you've not won it yet. But that's how he celebrated it, you know. And France, they tried with their little bits of shithousery as well. You see Kylian Mbappe kissing the ball before he takes his penalties. And you think, fair play, you're trying to get your advantage.
Yeah, well,
but,
he puts them away most of the time. So
fantastic. And he did really well. You know, he's gonna break Miroslav Klose's record. And then some, isn't he? But I do feel that really it was Messi who was the main person for them, because whilst Martinez had his big moments, there were times where he could have done better. He could have done better from that cheeky little Netherlands free kick. He could have done better against Saudi Arabia. He could have could he have done better with the Mbappe second goal? I don't know. He was a fantastic finish. I'm inclined to agree with you there. But Messi, when you look at his moments of magic, when he had to do something, the touch and finish against Mexico, where he just hangs back to get the ball, the clever little burst of movement against Australia, when he hadn't done anything at all in that game up until that point, the fantastic little wiggle that he did against Gvardiol, who was one of the best defenders in the tournament, and he made him look like a little boy when he wiggled past him and put the ball on a plate for Alvarez. But when you needed Messi to do something, he did it. The flick around the corner for the build-up for Di Maria's goal, the tracking back and tackling Mbappe in the World Cup final as well, the pouncing for the goal to get them back in front against 3-2. He did everything he needed them to, and he had this different side to him. He had this aggression to him. He had this sort of, I'm not the little boy, the little baby-faced person that everybody likes anymore. I'm the warrior Lionel Messi, and I'm not in a team of world-class superstars like I was at Barcelona. Don't get me wrong, those Argentinian players aren't shabby at all.
No, they got some good players.
Yeah, but they weren't the best 11 on paper.
No.
But they were a great team all in all, and he got out of the other players what he needed to. The supporting cast of Rodrigo de Paul was fantastic. Enzo Fernandez, he's going to be 80 million plus.
Yep. McAllister had a great World Cup.
Fantastic. The player who's going to break Messi's record, Julian Alvarez, he was phenomenal, considering they put him in again ahead of Lautaro Martinez, who's on fire for Inter Milan, but can't hit a barn door with a banjo for Argentina.
Nope.
Messi did everything he needed to. And one of the moments that summed that up was when Lautaro scored the winning penalty against Holland, Messi made a beeline for Emi Martinez to show him just how important he was to the team, and that's the sign of a true captain. He did everything he needed to. He had the weight of a nation's expectations on his shoulders, and he delivered. He delivered at the time that he needed to. And don't get me wrong, they had quite a few penalties, throughout. They had 4, and he put them away, considering he normally misses them. They had a lot of decisions go their way, which were a bit questionable at times, but I think other teams did as well. As I say, in the final, Canate, the ball flicks his hand before it gets to Mbappe, and then he wins the penalty. France had a few decisions go their way. You think of the Upamecano foul on Kane and the foul on Saka as well, to name but 2. But you need that rub of luck at times, and I think any other tournament before came too soon for Lionel Messi. He did what he needed to do. He used the energy that he needed to use, and every pass he made was perfect. Every
apart from the one for one of France's goals in the tournament, getting the ball away. But no,
yeah, he got caught out. He wasn't a pass, but yeah, he got caught out by Coman, and that went to show just how much France still wanted it. And fair play to Kingsley Coman for that moment. But all in all, his passes were spot on. His decision making to be spot on with your decision making as often as he is the reason why he's regarded as one of the greatest of all time. And I said before this tournament, I didn't think he needed the World Cup to cement it, but it helps. And for me, he's the greatest player of all time. He's easily the greatest of my generation, though he's got the likes of Kylian Mbappe and Gavi and Pedri, who are going to be coming for him going forward. They've got the best chances. Erling Haaland's a fantastic player, but he's not going to be able to do it on the world stage, I don't think, with Norway.
But when the World Cup has 48, 96 teams in it,
you might have that. Yeah.
Then you never know. Well, I'd say in terms of, you can make the comment, which I think I made early on, that Messi carried this team through the tournament, Martinez aside, because, world-class players on paper, when there weren't as many in this Argentina team as there has been in past Argentina teams. But I do think that, going all in on a narrative, it was, this is Messi's World Cup. We need to win it for Messi, to cement his status as the greatest player, kind of all time. It looked like the Argentina players bought into it as well. Because in terms of, I don't remember seeing Argentina at World Cups where you could tell, really, for most of the other players, it was, we get the ball to Messi, he will skin past everybody and lay it on a plate with somebody or put it in himself. So get it to Messi, we'll win. Get it to Messi, we'll win. I mean, in terms of some of the other teams they've had like 4 or 5 players who maybe most other people wouldn't say that they were as good as Messi, but they're thinking, yeah, we're world-class players, so where's our piece of the pie, as it were. But this was the first time, really. And I think because they knew it was going to be his last World Cup as well, the team was built around Messi, and it's basically get Messi the ball and we'll win. And that was kind of the mentality, and that is pretty much what happens. They got, as you mentioned, they got very good players, obviously, in terms of, it wasn't quite a, literal one-man job. But yeah, it's in terms of very much the last dance in terms of the world stage, and yeah, delivered. I think in terms of the debate about being the greatest player of all time will rage on. There's a lot of players and a lot of people who would agree with you in terms of putting Messi at that number 1 position. I think in the preview episode, I tiptoed him into the top 10. I think, you tiptoe him a bit higher. We didn't touch upon the debate too much in the preview. We outlined it, but I think in terms of what this World Cup will do for more people is, you mentioned in terms of next generation kind of players coming through, who's going to be kind of the best player of the next generation. I think this World Cup, for most people, and for me as well, to be fair, the debate about Messi and Ronaldo, who's the best player of this generation, I think this World Cup has swung it in most people's favour, who were kind of on the fence before, a lot towards the Messi camp. and especially in terms of, Ronaldo didn't have a great World Cup and was petulant in terms of being subbed and didn't really do very. And I think the fact that he got dropped for centre forward and then scored a hat trick kind of literally confirmed in terms of that's passing on the torch in Portuguese football circles. But yeah, I think in terms of that debate, apart unless you're Piers Morgan, a lot less people are going to be going for the Ronaldo camp now. And you could say that's unfair on Ronaldo, kind of 4 weeks of international football as opposed to a 20-year career for both of them. But yeah, now the set has been completed for Messi, Copa America and the World Cup. Yeah, more people are going to go into that side of the fence, I would say, in terms of this generation. Kind of that debt has been, that score has been settled now.
It has been, and I think it goes to show, doesn't it, that we knew it was the last chance for both of them, really, considering that Ronaldo's 2 years older than Messi as well, most definitely in his case. Whereas, as you say, Ronaldo tried to do it himself and was petulant when he wasn't played and whatnot. He wasn't the team player that he needed to be and didn't see the value of his teammates that Messi did in order to help him win the World Cup. Because you're right, there was a lot of let's get him the ball, but there was also a lot of, well, we know that he needs to walk around and have a little bit of a rest and take some time to see the game and see the opening. So we won't get him the ball absolutely every time, but we'll get into him when we need something. And I mean, one argument for that is the Alvarez goal against Croatia, where he just decided to run through the whole team, had about 3 billion slices of luck, but still stuck it in. And fair play to him, because the endeavour behind that was great. For the final, it was Angel Di Maria's final up until the moment that it got to the 90th minute, really, because he was fantastic. He was killing Kouande. Scaloni got the tactics spot on, and it wasn't until really when Messi won that ball, cut inside, and hit it straight at Hugo Lloris, did anybody go, okay, actually, this man wants to have the final say on this game, even though he'd scored the penalty, and what great penalties they all were. Di Maria was fantastic. He was another level. As he was in the Copa America final, where he scored that lob over the Brazilian goalkeeper at the time. But yeah, you're right. The next generation of superstars and who that's going to be is going to be a mouth-watering thing. But Kylian Mbappe, some of the stuff he does is a bit of a prick, the laughing and all of that. And it's quite nice when all that comes back to roost and, to haunt you. And you see Romero running up and laughing in his face and things like that. But you've got to have a bit of arrogance about, we liked it with Martinez. We liked it with Messi against Holland. Mbappe is going to be a global phenomenon going forward.
Yeah, I mean, it's when you win, you get away with it. As soon as you lose, people are going to be throwing it back in your face. And, well, for Argentina, they didn't lose. So in terms of Martinez, he gets away with it. Mbappe, they ultimately lost. So people are going to throw that back him a little bit. But, it's kind of, there's, shithousery kind of at the highest levels with a lot of players. So
I think the one thing that Argentina had, and this is the moment that I really thought they were going to win it. And I can't remember whether I said it to you and to the other guys, but I said it to a lot of people. And that was, as soon as they lost to Saudi Arabia, I said they've just won the World Cup. Because the thing was with that, and my thinking behind it was, they've lost now. They know what it feels like to lose. They can't lose again. They're going to know what it feels like to lose and to feel crushed. They can't do anything about that result now. So it's going to spur them on to make improvements to the team, to see it out to the final whistle as well, because they expected to walk all over Saudi Arabia. And I know they had a number of goals disallowed, but they deservedly lost in the end. And I think it was because of that, because they tasted defeat. They realised that just like when you get married and you're at the front of an altar before your wife comes down and you're feeling alone, you don't want to feel that way ever again. And they didn't want that feeling of losing at that World Cup ever again. And that's what spurred them on.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned it in the preview. Spain lost their opening game of the tournament, which they won. So yeah, true crossroad moments where other people were laughing at them. They were getting down to business, and in terms of they rode the luck, but most teams when they win a tournament they do ride their luck. In terms of it's very rarely plain sailing all the way through. And in terms of for Argentina, I think especially first World Cup victory since 1986. Yes, that was a vintage year. But yeah, they've lost 2 finals since then. So, if it wasn't in terms of, you can imagine that from an England perspective, if we'd lost 2 World Cup finals and then going for the third. I mean, well, we got 100% record in World Cup finals. So excellent in that statistical sense. But speaking of excellence in a linguistic and visual sense, anything else you want to say about this World Cup, or like Lionel Messi, have we completed it?
Mate, what can I say? I'm obviously like the goat of World Cup predictions now when I don't have to do any more ever again. But I will carry on because I want to carry on as a champion.
That you're doing the victory tour, showing off your many medals, and those many metaphorical and, well, I wouldn't be surprised if literal medals were being ordered as we speak for those achievements. But you can keep a track of everything that is going on prediction wise, kind of event wise, everything that's happened wise, preview, review, everything, distilled for your character pleasure, as long as Mr. Musk still keeps it open on Twitter, on our Twitter page at Talk Trinity. You can check out our audio episodes, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google. We're on FanHub. We're also on YouTube, so you can, for the ones where we've had the camera on, you can watch our delightful visages. Or the ones where the camera's off, you can just imagine what we'd look like in those particular scenarios, or the way what we'd be wearing. Don't imagine too much, otherwise, we might have to, call the authorities. That might be going a bit far. But joking aside, we hope that you have enjoyed our World Cup review because, well, as Will mentioned, he completed it. He did it. So, we'll brush aside my predictions. We win together on this podcast. And speaking of winning together, we are going to be back talking about the Villa, the day job, looking forward to those Christmas fixtures. Liverpool await us on Boxing Day and Spurs on New Year's Day. So we will be getting back to you with all our thoughts on those in our preview, well, episode or episodes. You'll just have to check out those social media channels to find out. But before I pass over to Mr. Trinity for his final thoughts before he goes to collect his medals and his trophy, thank you very much for listening, watching, engaging, subscribing, all the ways you interact with us at Talk of the Trinity. We do very much appreciate it. And I know I said this last time, but I do mean it this time. We are going to be back with you soon. So thank you very much for listening, but goodbye for now.
Yeah, cheers, Tar. Thank you very much. We do appreciate all of the listens, all of the views. We love it when you listen to us, especially when I'm right, which isn't very often. But I think that this World Cup has made up for all the Villa predictions of scores I've done, apart from the Man United one. But we will be back before the 25th of December, the holidays. And we hope that you can have as much joy and fulfillment as they are in Buenos Aires at the moment, where Diego is looking down on them. They're going to be gearing up for the big day, hoping that they get some golden gloves like Emmy Martinez, that they're watching the Mac Allisters in Home Alone, that they're doing their little snow Angel Di Marias. But the last thing that we can say, apart from cheers to our thank you very much, I'm Villa till I die, he's Villa till he dies, he's England till I dies, and I'm just a little bit Argentinian. For this one time only, I'm going to say, from all of us, have a very merry Christmassy. Christmas, Messi, Chris Messi, Chris Messi, Messi, Messi!
Yep.